What's up, everyone? I am here with the Godless Engineer. Thank you for joining me. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Just enjoying the nice weather. It's a good day.
I'm a little late today because I got caught up with work. It seems like I'm working a little bit more now than I ever did when I actually went to work.
That's a good thing, though, right? If you're staying busy, making money, that's a positive.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm teleworking, so
Oh.
I'm pretty much just at home. So I get to work earlier, and then I usually end up staying later because I don't really have to travel to come home or anything. So
Yeah, that's
it
nice.
works out.
How many hours a week do you put into streaming? Or, I'm sorry, into your YouTube channel on top of your regular job?
I mean, it usually takes me like 2 to 3 hours of editing a day. So 5 days a week. I would probably put it somewhere between 15 and 25 hours.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. So who is the Godless Engineer?
Well, the Godless Engineer is me. I initially started the brand back when Facebook was a big thing. Basically, I had come into the realization that I was an atheist, and I started, talking about my new worldview. Not that atheism is a worldview, just my worldview in general had changed, and so I started espousing some of these new ideas that I had online, and that really kind of drove a wedge between me and my family in general. Not like immediate family, but like extended sort of family. And so I decided that I would, take it off of my personal profile and onto a Facebook page, because back then you could interact with other pages as your page. You could essentially use a page as like a profile.
Right.
And so I would do that, and I would interact with other pages and everything. And that's kind of what my outlet was. And then at some point I decided to start making videos because like oddly enough, I saw, I would watch The Amazing Atheist and other atheist response videos. I'd be like, I can do this. And so I started doing it. And, as time went on, I was able to get into a position where I could regularly produce videos. And, religious people, they make videos all the time.
Yes, they do.
And so it's just sort of been an endless stream of content that I can make. I think I've got a potential video list right now that's over 1,000 videos long. Now that's
Are you serious?
Well, yeah. So they're not all like video response worthy, but they're all ones that I watched and I was like, I think there's enough here to where I can make a response video.
Okay.
And so like it just sort of accumulated over the past 6-7 years that I've been putting things into the list, and I'll pull things off of the list, and I'll use the list for like my live streams. But I mean, I always end up putting like 10 times more videos in the list than I take out.
Okay. That's a pretty big list. I have a lot of catching up to do.
But I named my brand Godless Engineer because when I started the brand, I had just graduated with my master's degree in software engineering. And so I wanted something that kind of, that was more descriptive in nature. And I didn't want to just be another atheist, whatever, So what I chose to do was Godless was a sort of an alternative way to, talk about atheism. And then engineer was another thing that I was very passionate about. My software engineering career, and so I just sort of put the two and two together, a Godless Engineer, and yeah.
So jumping back, was it if you don't mind my asking, was it a huge wedge that got driven in between you and your family, or was it just kind of a hiccup in the road?
Not really a big wedge, but I mean, it was not negligible. I had a few family members that actually removed me as a friend on Facebook so that they wouldn't, see any of my atheist ramblings. And I had a couple family members tell me like, "Hey, they removed you because they were tired of hearing you talk about God and stuff." And so I cared about my family. Well, I mean, I still care about my family, but
Right.
at the time, I guess I cared a little bit more about whether or not they approved of whatever I was saying. So I decided to shift all of that kind of stuff to the Godless Engineer brand.
And does it impact you now in any way?
Not so much. Although, I mean, I've really grown distant from my family in general. I used to, being in the South, I used to have like really big family gatherings, and I used to visit with my family all the time. But as I grew up, I got older, I really kind of drifted away from them in general.
Mhm.
So it wasn't necessarily so much because I was an atheist that I drifted away from them. It was more of a combination of things. And I probably wouldn't include the atheist bit in most of like my interactions with my family.
Okay. That's got to be tough, but a similar situation, so I definitely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So what are resurrection apologetics?
Well, resurrection apologetics, I mean, this is pretty much every time you see somebody that is trying to argue for the resurrection of Jesus or the reliability of the Gospels, and trying to convince you that Jesus resurrected from the dead and therefore he is the Son of God and Christianity is true.
Right.
There's a lot of bad arguments in it, and they try to get away with it by wrapping it up in some kind of like historical false historical facade. And I say facade because it's not really history. It's New Testament studies is what it is. And while that has an element of history in it, it is not itself a historical field. So you kind of it's a little hard to determine the nuances there, but
Right.
New Testament studies is more about the theology of Christianity and what arguments they can present that will support their end. And it doesn't matter whether or not those arguments are either magical or natural or even real arguments. As long as it supports a position that Jesus resurrected from the dead, they will count it as a positive argument on their end that makes their position more plausible.
So when you say a facade, just to be clear, you're not saying they're making things up. You're just saying they're not actually relying on historical evidence and they're relying on New Testament evidence. Is that correct?
Well, it's kind of a mixture of both. I say facade because it's not really history that they're presenting. Like it's not the same kind of history or the same kind of historical study that you would apply to any other field in history. These are things that only exist in New Testament studies. So it's a historical facade because these are not like criteria or methods that you would use in general in history.
Okay. So what are the earliest facts that both religious and secular historians agree are true, if any?
Well, so this is brought up a lot, especially in conjunction with Gary Habermas. Gary has these minimal facts that he claims that both secular scholars and Christian New Testament scholars would agree are actually facts, like that Jesus lived, that he died on the cross, and that his tomb was found empty. And they use various arguments in order to do that. But I mean, for me personally, I would say that stowing away my mythicism for a second for the sake of argument, I would say that the best that you could suppose or just speculate is that he lived and that he possibly died, even though we don't know exactly how or why he may have died. I think that those are two things that probably most secular and Christian scholars could actually agree on.
So, for clarity, would you say you're convinced a man named Jesus existed? Or where do you specifically stand on that?
Oh no, I'm a mythicist. So what a mythicist is somebody that doesn't accept that Jesus existed in history, or is not convinced that a man named Jesus. Specifically, I had to be specific because there were obviously people named Jesus in the first century. We have several instances of that in actual historical records. What I mean is that there's not a central figure that started the Christian movement and was persecuted and died, and then his followers ended up spreading his message. That is the historical Jesus, and that is the one that I say doesn't exist.
So, do you think that someone maybe not named Jesus was crucified at that time, or how much of the story do you believe or do you reject?
Well, I mean, there were a lot of people that were crucified at the time. So it's not that there weren't people being crucified by the Romans. It's I think that the Jesus story, everything that we know about Jesus, like from the Bible, is mythical. That would also include Paul's information about this Jesus figure. So the crucifixion by the Romans, I don't think actually happened to the originator of the Christian cult in the first century. I think that was a common thing that happened at the time, and it was even a common thing within Judaism itself. There are several laws or rules in the Old Testament that require you to punish the person by killing them and hanging their body up on display, which is a crucifixion type of punishment.
Okay. Jumping back a second, how would you define minimal facts? And the reason I'm asking is, so I'll be on another channel with someone who is a fan of minimal facts.
Okay. All right. Well, how I would define how do you define the concept of minimal facts, or what
specifically are they, or what are they used to prove?
Right. Well, minimal facts would be, at least as Gary Habermas defines them or describes them, is facts that regardless of your religious position, these are things that we can all agree upon that really happened in the past, or that there's evidence to suggest that they really happened. So those are the things. But I mean, like with Gary Habermas and his minimal facts, just take the crucifixion of Jesus. That's one of the things that he would agree is well supported in the evidence, and that most historians accept. And even a lot of atheists out there would be willing to accept that Jesus was crucified, mainly because that doesn't necessarily mean that he rose from the dead, just that he died in a very common way. But if you actually look at the evidence for crucifixion, of Jesus, we don't have evidence that the Romans crucified him, or that he was even crucified himself. We have Paul's writings that do talk about Jesus being crucified, but Paul's Jesus only appears to Paul in visions and gives him revelation through Scripture. Paul didn't actually see any of this happen. He also didn't talk about any kind of like historical information with the other apostles. He confirmed his gospel to the other apostles, but he doesn't ever denote the other apostles as being witnesses. Okay. So if you're looking for evidence that Jesus was really crucified in the first century, all you're going to find are speculation and hallucinations.
Okay. And so I guess here's my question. What evidence would you find most compelling? Like, is there something where you're like, okay, I accept this this could lead to the possibility of Jesus, of the Christian Jesus.
Right. Well, I mean, I have to say that the strongest position to take, and I regularly call this kind of a lazy position, but the reason why it's easy to get is because it is very plausible. That just some guy in the first century existed, some apocalyptic prophet that people took way too seriously, and then, and then ran with the idea. I think that's a strong possibility, but I don't think that it's more plausible than myth. But I would say that it is a one of the stronger arguments.
Okay, thank you. Question from the audience: how can you explain apologetics simply for the average person to understand?
Okay. So apologetics is basically just supporting your belief in, just take Christian apologetics, for instance. It's being able to rationalize and support your belief in a particular thing or idea. And it's the various arguments that you have in order to rationalize it to another person, or defend your particular faith or belief in an idea. And so, like with Christian apologetics, you have a lot of different arguments that ultimately stem from Thomas Aquinas's 5 ways. And pretty much, if you look at Thomas Aquinas's 5 ways, you can understand like pretty much all of modern apologetics.
Okay. Okay. So let's say right now we accepted the resurrection as possible. Would that resurrection contradict any other known historical information?
Well, so if we accepted that a resurrection really happened in the first century, I really don't know if we would have any kind of different evidence. I would think that we would have more like firsthand account kind of evidence. We would have Paul indicating that, these people, really knew Jesus in real life, and then also saw them rise. But I mean, even now in Paul's writings, you have him in 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. He talks about several people that supposedly saw Jesus Christ rise from the dead. So, I mean, if he really did rise from the dead, and resurrect, as we understand it from the Bible, I really don't think that there's anything else that we would find, like actual resurrection versus no resurrection. I think that we would still have the exact same kind of evidence that we have now.
Okay. Have you ever, or let me backtrack for a second. How do you feel, or what is your thought on presuppositional apologetics?
I feel like presuppositional apologetics is kind of a lazy way to argue for a position. Because, I mean, you're basically just starting off the argument like, well, I presuppose that God exists, so therefore you're wrong. Right. And then you automatically win the debate, according to you. So it's kind of a really poor way to argue for a belief, I would think.
Would you ever debate a presuppositionalist or anyone for that matter?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I've debated plenty of people before. I can't remember if I've directly debated a presuppositionalist, but I've dealt with a lot of their arguments, and it really just basically boils down to they presuppose that God exists, and and because God exists, God wrote the Bible, and so they have this whole logic chain that they run through in order to get back around to the idea that, well, that means that God exists. But it's a circular argument, because you're just saying, well, I presuppose God exists, so that means that God exists.
So then follow up to that, because when I had debated a presuppositionalist, he said, well, science is a circular argument because you're using science to prove science. How would you address that?
Well, I'd have to ask, like, how is science used to prove science? Because at that point, I really don't know what he even means by science. Like, I mean, are you using the scientific method to verify the scientific method?
I would think that's what he was trying to get at, if I'm remembering correctly.
I would love see this is where I think people need to be a little bit more direct in asking for examples, because I would really have to have like an example of like how somebody would use the scientific method in order to validate the scientific method, because the scientific method was developed out of the philosophy of science, and that's like, you know, the how we can come to know this reality. And I mean, like, that's more of a philosophy of science kind of question as to whether or not the scientific method can give you accurate results. You wouldn't actually use a scientific method to validate the scientific method.
Okay. So how do you feel where you're at now versus when you started? So, for example, several people have said to me, as time goes on, you're not going to be as friendly, you're going to get more tainted. How has your perspective changed with time in doing this?
Oh, well, I mean, I feel like I'm very much more connected on a social level, like, to other people in the community. Maybe that's just because I have I've always kind of increased my social media following. But I mean, I feel like I have a lot more friends now than I ever did. And I don't really have to pretend with these friends, because like I would have to pretend to, you know, be into like God and Jesus, when I mean, I believed in God and Jesus, but I really wasn't like hardcore kind of Christian, you know?
Right.
So I mean, I would have to, you know, go to youth services just so that I could have fun with my friends and everything. So, I mean, I really don't have to do that now. I mean, mainly because, you know, I don't really have any local friends, but I do have a lot of like close online friends, and we get together and we hang out, and I don't feel the need to like pretend or be a different person or censor myself. So it's a lot. That's a lot better in my opinion. But as far as my core person, I mean, I really don't think that I've changed, other than I've stopped beating myself up over things that I once considered to be sinful, but now I really don't find them to be all that bad. They're either neutral or, you know, they're in some cases good. It's really helped me identify the nuances in like the moral conversation. You know, the nuances in like murder and things of that nature. Not that I think about murder a lot or anything. Just saying, in the conversation of morality, like the nuances to murder are kind of vast as to what you mean and whether or not it's right or wrong, and then comparing, you know, how we understand murder now to how, you know, God commands the Israelites to kill people for literally no reason sometimes. So I mean, I think that it's really helped me develop personally a good bit.
But so I want to say something I've heard just in response to what you're saying. But what stops you from murdering people if you don't believe in God? I'm sorry. I'm assuming you've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, I'd have to say that if you feel like you need to believe in God to keep yourself from murdering somebody, maybe you need to see a psychiatrist or something. Because I mean, see, here's the thing: is that pretty much everybody, at least that we're going to interact with, live in pretty much the same kind of society. And all successful societies seem to have the same basic sets of moral values or moral facts. And one of those would be, don't kill your neighbor or don't kill your fellow person in your society. That's pretty much well defined in all societies, and I think that it's gotten to the point now where there's not really any kind of confusion on whether or not that's wrong, for I guess normal people, and then you have people that lack. I say normal, but for most of the population. Then you got the smaller portions of the population that are sociopathic or psychopathic, and I just. That particular area really highlights to me that it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God or not. If you're able to kill somebody, you don't find anything wrong with killing another person, you're going to do that regardless of whether or not you believe in God. So I really am confused whenever somebody tells me you have to believe in God to not murder, or to know that you shouldn't murder somebody, when you have plenty of religious people out there that have murdered in the present and in the past, and I'm sure in the future,
So how else, obviously, aside from becoming the Godless Engineer on YouTube, how else has becoming an atheist influenced your day-to-day life and mindset?
It really hasn't affected me too much, other than, I always try to better myself. And when I was a Christian, I would just believe things that people I trusted told me, right? And so after becoming an atheist, I guess as a result of my investigation of my beliefs, I'm more able to actually critically think about whether or not I believe something. I think that's been the biggest change, but I mean, that still hasn't changed like my core person. How I view morality may have changed a little bit with a new look on life, but I think that's only changed for the better, because things that like I said, things that I thought were sins at one time, now to me are not sinful. Like, they're not bad.
Right.
They're either neutral or good. And so that actually helped me out a lot, because growing up in the South, I've had a lot of run-ins with racism, and and it's always been a struggle, because I'm sitting here thinking that I'm the one that's wrong or off, when I don't have a problem with seeing two guys holding hands walking down the street, or I don't see a problem with an interracial couple. Same. And I'm sitting here thinking that I know that everybody else thinks that's wrong or bad, but I don't understand why it's wrong or bad. I just know everybody else thinks that it is, and so it's just it's kind of odd. Thinking about that though, this one time I was in middle school, and I had this kid that was sitting next to me that was harassing me, right? And I can't remember what I said to him, but I said, one day I finally snapped and I said something back to him. And then when I got called to the principal's office, and when I got in there, the principal was like, "How about I make y'all hold hands and go back to class?" Because it was something to do with homosexuality,
right?
And I get the point that the guy was trying to make, even though I think that was a bit inappropriate. I think now, knowing how I feel now about things, and not really caring about what other people think about me, I think that at that point in time, I would have been like, "That's fine. I'll hold his hand going back to class. I don't care."
Right. It's not a big deal.
Right, exactly. But at the time, I would be teased for possibly being homosexual, and so it was kind of which is kind of a weird thing, because I mean, normally you think about LGBTQ kids getting teased for it, but this is I was a cis white guy, and I was being teased for sort of like a fan being a fantasy. I guess that like they had a fantasy about me being a homosexual or something. Like they were using homosexuality like against me as like a pejorative.
Right.
And you know, at the time I was like, well, I don't want that to happen. But now, I mean, just in comparison, now there's a video on my channel. I can't remember. It was one of my comments video, but I actually went to a sex shop and got a dick lollipop,
Okay.
and I sucked it on camera. And so, you know, I just you know, thinking about the differences between like me as a kid and me now. I mean, there are some stark differences.
Yeah, it's weird how I can only say it from my point. I used to when I used to get teased for called gay, it used to bother me back then, and I would be like, no, I'm not. I found myself being defensive, and now it's like, okay, you think I'm gay, whatever. It's not an insult anymore. But it's kind of crazy how we've grown up in a society that teaches essentially that being gay is bad. And
Mhm.
do you think that all stems from religion, or do you think there's other sources outside of religion that cause this?
Well, I think that the ultimate source of it is religion and how we look down on those, you know, marginalized groups. I know that I was teased as being a homosexual when I was growing up, as like I don't know, people thought that it was funny and everything like that, but I knew for me, like I was like, no, I don't do that. I'm not a no, I'm not that. Like,
Right.
I, I I don't know. I the only place that I can really see that coming from is religion, even though like just take me for instance. Like I had never heard, like when I was growing up, I was never taught that the Bible says to stone homosexuals, right? Or
Right.
to kill homosexuals or anything like that. Like I was never taught that from the Bible. But I mean the bigotry towards the homosexual community and the LGBT community in general ultimately would stem from that, because like I was taught to feel that way about LGBTQ people, and or being gay or lesbian or whatever. I was taught to feel that way, but they were taught by either somebody else that either read the Bible or was taught it by somebody else that read the Bible.
Right.
You know, so like that's really the only place that I can think of that it could come from.
What else can we do as atheists outside of spreading awareness to help the LGBTQIA plus community?
Well, I mean, I think normalization is the best thing that we can do. You know, I guess pushing LGBTQ creators, you know, uh, not allowing somebody's sexuality to really matter in a conversation
Right.
or matter at all, and you know, promoting those voices out there that are part of that community. I think that's probably the best thing, especially me as a cis white guy, I guess, is just, you know, being supportive of people in the community and um, you know, being there to be being there to sort of not necessarily defend, but like having their back, I guess,
Right.
which is kind of the same as defending them. But it's more like just, I don't know, because I don't want to say like I feel like I have to defend the LGBTQ community, but I support them, and you know,
Absolutely.
I have their backs. And if there's ever a conversation where somebody is speaking about the LGBTQ community in like a pejorative manner, you know, being there to stand up and speak out against that kind of thing, I think is the best thing that I can do.
Yeah. I equate atheism to, for myself personally, to being like, you know, chains pulling off your mind. What did it do for you? Was it, because to me it was one of the like most freeing feelings in the world as time went on, because all my, you know, political and beliefs just changed, you know, within weeks it felt like, and it would What did it do for you, or how would you describe that feeling after becoming an atheist?
Well, so the way that I would describe it is like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. I guess the chains that you're talking about, because when I became an atheist, I didn't have to really guilt trip myself over a lot of things. And Ray, I talked to Ray Comfort recently, and he gave me his whole spiel about how you didn't want to feel bad about looking at porn and doing all these sinful things.
Oh, come on, really?
He played that card. But this is an after effect. Like, after I decided that I didn't believe in God, like, I didn't feel bad about not going to church because I didn't believe,
right?
And I wouldn't feel bad about porn, if I saw it, or I saw it in a movie or anything like that, because there's nothing wrong with it. Like, it was depending, of course, that conversation can get go down a rabbit hole, but the appropriate kind of porn obviously is kind of a neutral and or good thing at times. Of course, you could get into the seedier side of things, but I'm talking about in general. For the most part, I don't consider porn to be a bad thing. I consider it to be neutral or good. Right. And it was things like that that kind of allowed me not to like abuse myself about partaking in that, because when I was a Christian, I would get to a point where I would feel horrible about it, and about not going to church or not doing certain things as a Christian that I'm supposed to do, and so I would feel bad about it. I would abuse myself over it, and then I would be all into the faith, and then of course I would fade away again from the faith. But I think it's that cycle of self-abuse that I really broke away from that helped me lift that guilt that I would always feel.
It really is a great feeling. I'd like to think that we're both better human beings now than we were before. At least I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I would say overall, like, I'm definitely much better off since I became an atheist. Because like my view on social issues has changed drastically. I mean, I know at one point in time I considered myself a Republican.
Same.
Even if I didn't really recognize that I would call myself a Republican, like I was like, well, I'm going to vote for this guy that's a Republican, right? And just because, I mean, that's what I'm around all the time. I'm in one of the reddest states, I think, that's out there. There's like me being a Democrat in Alabama. I mean, it means something, but it also at the same time means that I'm pretty much never going to win, except if your candidate is up against Roy Moore.
I would hope Roy Moore doesn't ever win anything again.
I hope not. But Roy Moore was removed from his judge seat once and then reelected back into the same seat before. So hopefully he won't actually get elected to the Senate or the House.
I would hope not. So I guess how bad is it in some areas of Alabama? So for example, my friend invited me to church and he let me wear my "This is what an atheist looks like" shirt. And they were actually surprisingly very welcoming. Can you do that in Alabama? Or what would happen if you did that?
In my area, for the most part, the times that I've been around religious people in that kind of context, they've all been very nice about things. And they haven't really been combative or anything like that. But I really think that it kind of depends on the context that you're in, because like at work, I've had coworkers scream at me, when we've been in a conversation that includes religion. I've had people that have sort of cornered me in parking lots for a couple hours talking to me about Jesus.
Like
and
lecturing you, or?
Yeah, pretty much just talking to me about why I don't believe and why I should, and telling me why I should believe and all that kind of stuff. And they usually walk away with, well, can I pray with you? Or can I pray for you? And so, I mean, it's been relatively nice, the interactions that I've had, but I think that, depending on the venue and the context in which it is in, it could also be very bad.
How do you feel when someone asks if they can pray for you? So what, like, for example, I don't think there's anything to prayer. I think it's just as reliable as, well, not doing anything or thinking positive. But
Yeah.
I'm okay with someone praying for me, because it's like, hey, if you have evidence for God, pray to him that he reveals himself to me. Like, I'm all for it. I want to see. How do you feel about that, or where do you stand on prayer?
Well, in general, like if I'm having a hard time or something like that, and I'm like not asking for actual help, and they're like, "Well, I'll pray for you," I'm like, "Okay, I don't care." Like I'm really kind of apathetic about it. Like, you can pray for me if you want to, but I really don't care if you do it. And but the times that I get upset about people praying for something or praying for someone is when they're more or less doing it for themselves because they can't do anything. Because they can't do anything, but it's like a situation that's a lot more serious. Like,
Right.
like if a school shooting happens and it's like, well, I'll pray for them. It's like, oh, well, you could do something more than just pray, because that's obviously not working. It's very situational dependent. I think that in general, most of the time I'm apathetic about it, but depending on the situation that you're praying for, I think that it could possibly make me mad, but it really depends on the situation.
Okay. So question and if anyone else has a question in the audience, feel free to put it in the comments and we'll get to it. Our question from Puck. Knowing that Ethan is new to learning about all of this, what should he learn about next? And who do you think would be a good teacher? I don't need a teacher, Puck. I just need to listen to a few. No, I'm kidding. I probably need a teacher because I am so behind on all this stuff. I feel like it's playing catch up.
Right. Well, I mean, honestly, the way that I started out was I just watched a lot of debates. Listening to both sides of the argument is probably the best way to make an informed decision. And I'm not really, I really caution against watching some of these online debates that have been happening lately, like with some of the channels out there that host debates all the time. I guess I'm talking more in-person debates between, I guess, what you would consider to be professionals. I would think that any debate that like Matt Dillahunty is in, which he's not.
Those are the best. They are the best.
Yeah, so even Matt would say that he's not like a professional philosopher or anything like that. But I think that Matt, in my experience, Matt has some of the best responses to religious arguments. But you also have like a lot of scholars out there that debate, like Richard Carrier, which me and Rick are fairly close friends in that, we talk on a regular basis about activism in this kind of area. And so like he's got a lot of debates out there, like on the resurrection, refuting resurrection apologetics. Matt Dillahunty, he's also done several debates with like Mike Licona. But I would watch debates and from professional type of people in real settings, and I would watch that. I would listen to both sides and see which one has the argument that makes the most sense to you, and figure out like why that makes sense. Other than that, I mean, I don't know if you read books or do the audiobook thing, but there's a lot of great audio or books out there in general that you could read. Like there's Andrew Seidel. He has his most recent book is The Founding Myth, and that's where he talks about the myth that the United States was founded on a Christian religion. So it really depends on what area you're really looking to get into as far as understanding things, because it really is a broad subject, like a a very broad landscape here. Like there's a really great debate between William Lane Craig and Sam Harris on the topic of morality. And Sam Harris tries to redefine objective morality so that you can get objective morality without God.
Mm.
And I think that you can be objective about morality, but like absolute morality is really what the religious argument is.
Right.
And this is that Aquinas's 5 ways, which I don't know if you've looked up what Thomas Aquinas's 5 ways are, but if you look at that, you can see basically all of modern apologetics from that itself.
Okay.
And then, and so that's like the moral debate. And then you've also got the creationism debate. And, if you want to learn more about that, I mean, there's so many channels out there where they present really great information, like Vice Rhino, Apologia. Both of them produce fantastic videos. If you're looking for more on the technical and I guess both Vice Rhino and Apologia are very academic in sourcing their videos and everything, but like Jackson Wheat delves a lot more into like the science of evolution. And so I mean Gutsick Gibbon is another one that's great for the science behind evolution too. And so I mean, you have so many creators out there that are great for so many different things.
Right.
But if I had to point you in one direction first, it would probably be the debates, like the more professional debates, and looking at those, like on the existence of God. There's so many debates on the existence of God. I would say pretty much if you started out, thank you, hon. If you started out with any Christopher Hitchin debate on God existing, I think that would probably be a good start.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look. I do love good debates, especially again. I love Matt Dillahunty's debates, especially when he starts saying, "Well, I guess he's never said no, you're done in a debate," but that's still one of my favorite things he says. All right, question for both, although I'm not qualified to answer this. What is the best thing we can do as veteran atheists to help those that are just coming out of religion or considering leaving religion?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to let people know that you can be there or that you are there to answer any questions or to lend support in any kind of way. Interacting with other atheists when they have questions about things or they're saying something, especially if they're saying something and you know that it's wrong. Don't come in so heated. Like, don't come in like you're offended that they're wrong or something like that, and you're treating them like you would treat some flat earther who's sitting there in derogatory. I would say try to have a very compassionate and understanding sort of demeanor talking to people. Really explain your position and why you consider them to be wrong. Don't come in wanting to change their mind, but present your position in a way that would persuade them in general. Like if they end up not accepting, your conclusion on things, that's fine. Because I don't think that anybody should just automatically accept anybody's position.
Of course not.
I think that if you show compassion, understanding, and come in trying to educate and ultimately better that individual, without being like arrogant about it, of course. Mm-hmm. I think that you can really reach them, and that they will either come around to it or they'll just be better off in general. So good conversation, letting them know that you're going to be there for them, to support them and help them. And because I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss from being, between being a Christian and being an atheist, is that sense of community. The idea that, if you're in need of something, you can go and ask somebody for help. And I think that that's what we kind of need to start providing in our community, is this sense that if somebody's struggling with something or somebody has an issue with something, that they can come and ask people for it. And that's why, you can always message me on Twitter or on Facebook. I keep kind of an eye on my Facebook messages through the page. I try to make myself available to answer questions or to help people out when I can.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I interact with people on Twitter and on not Facebook really, but on YouTube. I'll answer things in the comments. I'll try to be supportive and understanding and trying to point them in the right direction if I feel like they're wrong. That's actually how I met my wife, Casey.
Really?
Yeah, she found my page, and my page helped her be okay with not believing in God. It gave her that sort of that sense that she wasn't crazy or wrong, that other people were thinking the same things that she was.
Right. It sounds like you're a fan of the friendly conversation method, because that's literally the premise of my entire channel, is bringing people who completely disagree together, but doing it in both an educational and friendly atmosphere. I think that's the most important tool at our disposal. And
well, yeah, because I think that I do very much support friendly conversation, because that's really the only way that you can ever hope to change somebody's mind on something. Again, I don't think that should be the goal of your conversation, but if what you want to do is try to change somebody's mind about an idea or belief that they have, definitely being belligerent about it's not going to do it. In fact, that's going to cause them to reject it even harder.
Exactly. They clam up. They resist it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
So to quote my friend Larry, so in other words, we need to be as Christian as possible.
Well, you see, that's the weird thing, is that the word Christian has become sort of an adjective for just anything that you consider to be good. But
yes.
Really, I mean, if you really think about Christian behavior, it's anything but only a good thing as far as behavior goes. Because I mean, if you look at the news, I mean, you have Christians that end up killing other people just because they're they believe something else, or they think something else. But I mean, I think that happens regardless of what you believe. So I really think that it's a misnomer for the whole Christian adjective, but I do get what he's talking about. And being as nice and cordial as possible, I think, is whether or not you want to consider that Christian. I think that is kind of the demeanor that you want to have whenever having conversations.
Yeah, I agree. Lance Nielsen said, wanted me to tell your wife hi. I guess that's not meant like that. He apparently knows your wife and met you once many years ago.
Oh, okay. Lance says hi, honey. Hi. She says hi.
What are you is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about what you're working on right now?
Well, yeah, sure. Well, so on my channel, I put out 5 videos a week. So, I'm constantly working on things. So tomorrow morning, I actually have a video that's going to be posted that is actually part of a debate series that I'm having with another person on Twitter. He wanted to try a different kind of format where we post individual videos that are parts of the debate.
Okay.
So it's going to be like a normal sort of debate kind of style where you have opening statements and then rebuttals and then closing statements and that kind of thing. But he was wanting to do it in individual videos rather than in a single sort of live stream. So I'm trying to be very open and even to Christians out there, so that I can, because I've got this weird reputation that I'm apparently very mean, and it comes from the way that I've structured my videos in the past, and I admit that in the past I've been a bit harsh, like in my videos.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I mean, so I have this habit of comparing prayer to giving Jesus a blowjob. And so like that's one of the things that I've brought up a lot in the past, and that I still bring it up on occasion. But in my videos that I produce, like my scripted videos and response videos, I've really kind of started moving away from that kind of rhetoric and kind of moving more into a straightforward kind of fact-based kind of thing,
right,
but still maintaining some humor to it. But I mean, even then, there's plenty of things that people could point to say, well, that's just too harsh, kind of thing. So, I mean, I have this reputation that I'm somewhat mean, or in some way. So, like, if a Christian, wants to have a debate and is very cordial about it, adult about it, and it isn't like grandstanding or something like that, I'll go out of my way to, have the debate with them in whatever kind of fashion that they want, as long as it's not text-based, because I really hate typing.
Same. I would rather just have a conversation with somebody than sit there and go back and forth on the computer.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, I want to be very open for both atheists and Christians out there to have a conversation with me and try to, I guess, quote unquote, talk sense into me. So yeah, I've just tried to be very open. But yeah, so that's the video that's posting tomorrow. It's my opening statement it's just a very basic, debate on theism, like whether or not theism, like arguments for and against theism, I think is technically what the debate's titled. But then Mondays and Wednesdays are usually like response videos of some kind, and I really don't know what I'm going to be like responding to on Monday just yet. I have a few candidate videos, and I just need to pick one. And then on Tuesdays, I actually do a Bible study with my wife, Casey. And so we usually record those like on Sundays. And then Thursdays is a clip from my Skeptic Mafia podcast, which we post up on Tuesdays as well. But that's a podcast for my members on the channel. They get access to the full podcast, while on Thursdays I usually post up a clip from the podcast, usually covering like one topic or video. And then Fridays is usually a kind of a toss-up kind of day. It's if I have something to post, I'll post it. If not, I have my live stream that night, kind of thing. But outside of like video production, I am working on a few apps right now that I'm planning on. Well, one of the apps already released and in stores. That's Crestus. It is. It's an app that gives you information about mythicism. Basically, it gives you the arguments, for it, and it gives you rebuttals against arguments against mythicism. And I'm working on a new update that's transitioning away from one framework to another framework. So I've been working on that lately. I'm also working on a Bible app that is
a Bible app.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I was looking. I've always used Bible Gateway, right, for all of my like Bible translations and everything like that. But the problem is that all of the Bible apps and everything like that, they only have the Bible. And so what I wanted to provide was, several versions of the Bible to pick from, which I won't be able to include like popular versions. I'm only going to be able to include the ones that are in the public domain, because apparently Bible versions or Bible translations are copyrighted, and you cannot, explicitly use them without either permission, or sometimes you got to pay in order to use it.
I mean,
But most of them are copyright protected, and so you're actually limited to, it's either 500 verses or 1,000 verses quoted from any one translation. Which I didn't know. I didn't know that you were like restricted from quoting the Bible. Right. In my Bible app, what I'm doing is I'm taking the Bible and a few different versions of that, and then I've also got the Apocrypha, and I've got the Book of Mormon, and I've got the Catholic version of the Bible in it. And then I'm planning on adding more things, there's various documents from like the church fathers that a lot of people like to reference too. And so what I'm planning on doing is I'm starting off with the Bible, the Apocrypha, and the Book of Mormon, and I'm putting all of that into the Bible app so that people have like one app to go to, and they can look at that. But on top of all that, I'm also going to be including, whenever you look up a Bible verse, it's going to have a database of, violent verses that it, if you look up a verse, then you're going to have like an info screen that is going to tell you like whether or not this is like a violent verse or anything like that. It's also going to have like a list of these violent verses that you can just go to, and you can find like a violent verse if you need to give an example of a violence in the Bible.
I need that app.
Yeah.
I really need that app.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to have like all of these tools for, somebody to use if they want to pull, like if you need a violent verse, or if you need an homosexuality verse, or if you need an example of misogyny in the Bible, you're going to be able to go there and just quickly pull up a verse from it and use it. So I'm going to have a lot jam packed into it. But that's another app that I'm working on. And then I'm also working on an app for I don't know if you've heard of Telltale Atheist.
I haven't.
Okay, he's got really great channels too. He's got a podcast channel and his main channel where he deals with a lot with cults. He wants an app for determining whether or not some kind of movement, idea, or organization is considered cult or cult-like. And so I'm going to have an app for that. I'm working on, getting all the information needed for that. And I'm working with him in order to be able to have like a wizard for you to go through a questionnaire and to see if something is a cult or not.
When would you expect this app? Like, are we talking 3 months, 6 months, a year? What is a timeline?
I don't really have a good timeline, especially for the cult app, because we're still kind of gathering information in order to get into the app. And plus, I took over the Crestus app, and so ever since I took that over last year, I've been really heavily invested in learning how to make mobile apps and make them in a well-engineered way. And so right now I'm working on learning like my chosen framework, which is, in case anybody's curious, is React Native. I'm using that framework so that I can have one code base and publish to all platforms. but I'm working on getting that going, understanding that platform, and getting just a good base on that, and then I can start, actually getting the nuts and bolts into the apps, like the Bible app. I've got a good bit of stuff done on that, and that's helped me immensely in learning the framework.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of using that to learn the framework so that I can build like the cult app a lot better, as well as build a better version of Crestus.
Awesome. I look forward to this because that will be very useful to someone like me.
And for the Bible app, I'm probably like, I don't know, maybe 20% of the way through. I spent a good week just like condensing all of the information, all of the Bible versions into my database, and getting all of the data set up. So I've got all of the data there. Now I'm just working on the front end of getting the app to do what I need it to do. So I would probably, if I had to speculate about the Bible app, I would probably say by the end of the year, I'll probably have something up.
Awesome. Well, I definitely look forward to that. Where can everyone check you out at?
Well, I am on YouTube at Godless Engineer. I'm on Twitter, Godless Engineer. Pretty much any of the social media platforms. If you just type in Godless Engineer and it's a QR code that is the icon, then that's pretty much me. It's pretty distinctive. So anywhere you are, just look up Godless Engineer. Oh, I'm on TikTok too.
You're on TikTok? I'm still learning TikTok. I'm pretty bad at it. So time for what I feel is the most important question of the night. Have you ever karaoke'd? Or would you ever karaoke?
Oh, karaoke?
Yeah.
I karaoke at home alone with Casey.
So we can never get you to karaoke on screen.
Oh no! Well, I mean, okay. So every Friday night, I've got a ukulele, and so I sing various things. Like I have my own theme songs.
Can
like,
you do one for us right now?
I learned. I am terrible, but that's the point.
So I guess you would try karaoke then sometime, maybe over a stream, perhaps.
Well, yeah, probably. I mean, I don't. I know how bad I am at singing.
Same.
So I'm not here thinking that I can sing or play this particular instrument. I know that I can't do either of them, and so I'm okay with sounding bad.
I feel the same. I just like having fun. So I do want to thank you very much for doing this interview. I appreciate it. I'm very new at this, and I have a lot to learn. So this was a very good experience for me, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this.
Oh yeah, no problem. Like I said, I love being available to people to have like conversations like this, anytime you want to have a stream or you just need to talk, you can always contact me. And it might take me a little bit to get back to you, but I usually end up getting back to my messages.
Yeah, I mean, you got back to me every time, and that's awesome. So I do appreciate it.
Yeah. So anytime you need any kind of help, even with like YouTube algorithm stuff, I've helped a good many people better understand it. Like, I don't know. I don't really get the same kind of views as like some of the other atheists, the popular atheists out there. Not that I'm popular or anything.
You're a popular atheist. You're at like what I think just under or just above 50,000 subscribers.
Yeah, it's just under 50,000. But I mean, I don't know. I don't consider that very popular.
All right. Well, you're very popular for me. How about that?
Anytime you have any questions like about YouTube or anything else, you just let me know and I'll be there to help.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. If you could stay on the line for a second, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Go subscribe and like the Godless Engineer. And then also, if you could do me the favor, like and subscribe here. And I will be back in an hour and 15 minutes with the first ever Women of Atheism Roundtable. We have 6 different females coming on, which I'm very excited about. It is going to be Cynthia McDonald, Jenna Belk, Susan Turpin, Cindy PLAZA, Jenna, and Nervardia. So we will be back in an hour and 20 minutes. Again, thank you, Godless Engineer.